You know, I got this text message from a friend of mine, and he gave me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 reasons that are completely bullish, and he can't understand why Bitcoin is basically not running in terms of price. He's on the verge of giving up, and he wants to sell his Bitcoin. He wants to move over to something else, etc., right? So he's going through this emotionally challenging period, just like a lot of people. So I kind of want to go through this list and kind of answer some or give my thoughts really as to what's going on here and why these things are happening, and Bitcoin is kind of not moving, and when Bitcoin is going to move, and also kind of my thoughts on next year, and just go through that really, because it's quite entertaining to see people kind of look at how people look at the world is very different, versus what I've learned in my time, right? And again, when you're a trader, there's this saying, right? Like you gotta have, I think Raoul Pal said it, like you've got to, you've got to have strong opinions loosely held, right? As a hodler, I have very strong opinions and they're violently held. And so, because I believe in the thematic overall idea that Bitcoin is being adopted, and now it's actually accelerating because it's now not only being adopted by people, but it's being adopted by the C-suite of the U.S. government. It's being adopted by basically all of Wall Street at this point, right? As Michael Saylor pointed out at his talk at Bitcoin Mena. And so his first point here is gold's at a new all-time high, right? Gold's always, is pushing a new all-time high. And we'll cover point 2 as well, which is silver all-time high. Silver's been running in the last couple of days. And he said, right, all of this is happening. Why isn't gold running? Well, the reason for that is very simple, right? Everyone perceives, and I as a hodler also agree, that Bitcoin is a risk-off asset to everything else going on in the world, right? That it is a risk-off asset. It's the hardest money known to man, and it is a risk-off asset. However, that's not how Bitcoin is trading. Bitcoin is trading as a risk-on asset. So as people start to feel good about themselves, they'll start taking more risk. And right now, they don't feel good about themselves, which is why the President of the United States, the Treasury Secretary of the United States, their number one key focus is to pump the economy into the midterms next year, right? So while gold and silver are making new all-time highs, that's actually a good indicator that Bitcoin at this moment in time would not be making a new all-time high, simply because it is trading like a risk-on asset. And I did a video on this a couple years ago, which is why you should subscribe to the channel, right? Because you would understand this if you subscribe to the channel, that there is a risk curve, and Bitcoin is currently on the end of that risk curve. And as it matures, as the understanding of Bitcoin grows, it will move down that risk curve more towards real estate and equities and things like that, and that'll change how the dynamics of it. And what's done really well at kind of explaining that is Plan B with his stock to flow model, and how Bitcoin stock to flow kind of at every halving kind of shifts towards one of these assets. And the price stock to flow price model has failed because he kept changing it. But if you look at the original one, it's actually not that bad. Now, so it's a gold all-time high, silver all-time high. That's actually a signal that people are not comfortable with risk on, right? What we want to see is gold and silver turn to the downside. And you can see that it's getting close because there are people basically pivoting from Bitcoin to becoming gold and silver experts, to talking about how gold and silver is is signaling a coming crash, and how the COMEX, CME, etc., are about to blow up, right? When it gets to that fever pitch level, and the fact that all this is signaling some kind of insider, blah, 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 that's when you know we're reaching topping levels on gold and silver. And so that's about to happen, right? I don't know when it's going to happen. I can't give an exact price target, but on the 14th of October, I sent out a tweet saying I think gold tops around 4,300 and silver tops around 60, right? And that's not forever. It's just the near term. But the near term with gold and silver could be 5 or 10 years, right? So they're still going up, which means the fear trade is still alive. The Fed basically came out and said, yep, we're going to lift off the quantitative tightening, but instead of 3 cuts next year, we think 1 cut is coming next year. And I just saw a Federal Reserve governor just now say that, so basically that's what the chairman said. And then one of the governors came out and said, I think we're going to see more cuts. So this is all drama and bullshit. The bottom line is they've got to get liquidity into markets. They've got to get liquidity into the economy because that's the only thing that's going to win an election. So, it's all drama at this point of what's going on. Next thing he said was QE was announced. Yeah, but that doesn't mean it started, right? And also QE was not announced. To be very clear, what they said was they're going to stop quantitative tightening and they're going to start buying, basically, they're just basically going to baseline zero, which to a certain extent, I would like to also say it, like it is QE, because if you're not tightening, by definition, you're maintaining the easing, right? So it's been announced, but it hasn't started. QE, if you want to call it that, starts today, Friday the 12th of December. And so we'll see how this happens. The other key thing that I realize is that when you're thinking like a retail investor, you seem to think that as something is announced, the market's going to start reacting to it. And the reason why we have that bias is because that's when we would react to it. But institutions and smart money doesn't think like that. Again, I said this a few months ago that there's a smart buyer in this market and you got to be very careful because they're going to come and take your Bitcoin, because the dips that started happening were much more shallower. And obviously we had a liquidation in October, and that's that was an interesting experience for a lot of new people. But it was a normal, we've had a 30%, 35% correction in Bitcoin. That's completely normal for Bitcoin. So, you got to think about it like the downstream effects of this. It's not about the announcement. In fact, buy the rumor, sell the news is a very common thing. So you got to be careful. Yes, it was announced, but that doesn't mean it started flowing. And markets always, respond to what's actually happening rather than kind of what's going to happen. I like to think about it like that. Now, they do forward price things, right? They do forward price things, but Jerome Powell has been very smart. He's giving the president exactly what he wants, but attaching a big old chain to yank onto the dog that he keeps loosening up, right? The dog is interest rates are coming down, but there's a big chain attached to it, which is, I don't think it's going to come down as much next year. Now, it might just completely change it next year, right? And so we'll see what happens, but he's still got that big chain, and what the market wants to see is interest rates coming down. They're coming down faster than you thought, and they're coming down forever. They're all going to zero, and that's when the market would actually pump, because other than that, the future pricing of something is kind of like what the market is going to do, right? And so, which is why it's important that when they announce the new Fed chair is going to be extremely important, because the moment that's announced, the market will start pricing for that. And I think we're going to see, a bullish reversal here, right? And he said the next thing, the new crypto Fed chair. We do not have a new crypto Fed chair because there is no Fed chair announced, right? This is the other thing that retail, again, like I said, because there is a rumor of Kevin Hassett getting the nomination, does not mean he has got the nomination. And smart money is not going to react to that. They're going to let dumb retail money react to these things, and then skim off assets off the top. Then he said BlackRock ETF. And yes, we've had a BlackRock ETF, and the buying has been monumental. And BlackRock ETF has caused, hundreds of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, hundreds and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of new people to expand their ownership of Bitcoin in their portfolio. And that's extremely bullish. And I believe that we would have had many more 30% plus dips if that BlackRock ETF wasn't there, especially with, the large kind of, holders kind of pivoting out, which I don't blame, by the way. If you put, 10, 15, $20,000 into Bitcoin, now you walk away with $1 billion. Best of luck to you. I wish everything for the best for your family, right? I don't think it's the right thing to do at this point, but I can completely understand it, right? If you're on a flyer and suddenly it's worth $1 billion, you did an amazing thing. I still think you should hold it. And he said, crypto in the White House. Yes, that's true. But all of these bills are delayed. There is no, yes, there's a quote unquote Bitcoin strategic reserve, which basically they've said the only way they're putting Bitcoin into that is by taking it from people. So there's no new buying of Bitcoin going on by the US government. All of that is still in process. And then he said, global liquidity pumping. Kind of, right? Because yes, global liquidity is going up, but the US has not started yet, and there's so much uncertainty around it that it's not really seeping in. So the point here is that there is a lot of bullish, there's a lot of bullish tailwinds, but they haven't quite hit yet. And most importantly, they haven't hit the confidence cycle yet, right? So while all these things are happening, gold and silver are still going up and they're not turning. When gold and silver turn, that will start signaling. In fact, one of the early signals that we had was that, the NASDAQ has been lagging, but the IWM, which is the Russell 2000, started actually going up while the NASDAQ was lagging. That starts to signal an early rotation and confidence coming back in, because you now no longer have just a concentrated rally in AI, which has been holding up the entire stock market, but you now have a broadening of that rally into different things and more confidence coming into different things. And of course, as people get more confident, the PMIs are going to turn, and that starts, as Raoul Pal has been talking about, the business cycle of that. And I'm going to do a video on that, so subscribe to the channel so you get my perspective on that. So there is a lot that's bullish, but it's not happening yet, right? And so retail will look at that and go, well, if it hasn't happened yet, then it's never going to happen. And that's a very childish way to look at things, but that's how retail is. Retail money is, that's why it's called dumb money, right? There's a reason why it's called dumb money. And so if you're here and you're going, okay, all these things have happened, Bitcoin's not pumping, so therefore I'm going to sell it. Well, sell it. Do exactly what I responded to him, my friend of mine, right? So he knew I was joking. But I basically said, yeah, I think you should sell it. Yeah, because, clearly nothing's going on, right? And so, from my perspective, a lot of bullish things are happening. A lot of liquidity is going to come into the market starting like middle of December, going into next year. I'm super confident on Q1 and Q4 of next year. I'm less kind of confident about Q2 and Q3, simply because it's a political year, and political years are always kind of tricky. So you might see a massive, and by the way, Bitcoin is a liquidity sniffer, right? And so what I would say is going to happen is that Bitcoin's going to peak out a lot sooner than equities next year. And Q2 and Q3, you may see a sizable dip in the market next year, right? Especially as the new Fed chair is about to come in, et cetera, et cetera. Markets always like to have some fun. So I think you may see, I think Q1 is going to be bullish, and I think Q4 is going to be bullish. Q2 and Q3, I think, are going to be quite challenging. So you gotta hedge and think about what you're going to do with your holdings in that type of environment, right? So my base case right now is that I think we kind of peak out Bitcoin, which is a liquidity sniffer, so it will sniff out the liquidity very early in Q1, and then Q2 and Q3, we're going to see a massive redistribution to the tune of 50 to 60%. And then Q4 will start having some kind of recovery. And that's what I kind of am thinking. I'm not really, 100% on that. But, if you are sitting here and you're going, okay, how do I manage my positions? And if you need to take profits, then I think Q1 is where you're gonna be taking those profits. I don't know, right? But that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. I think Bitcoin's gonna sniff out all that liquidity super early. The stock market may continue to rise, but then I think you're gonna see some kind of pullback Q2, Q3, and then after the midterm elections, you'll see the run up in the market once there's a lot of certainty. And basically, what I think is going to happen is I think the Democrats are going to win the midterms, because typically throughout American political history, whichever party wins the presidential election, the other party wins the midterms, right? And if that happens, then the market will understand we're in absolute, frozen terms when it comes to the market for the next 2 years in terms of politically. Massive certainty comes back into the market, and the market takes off into Q4. So that's what I kind of think is going to happen next year. But regarding all of these things that, my friend texted me, he's absolutely right. All these things are happening. Why isn't Bitcoin moving? Because smart money doesn't think like that. All of these things are happening, but none of it is happened, right? And so the biggest signals we're going to see that we are moving from risk off to risk on is gold and silver are going to turn, and they're going to top out for this run, and then Bitcoin's going to sniff out incoming liquidity, as we're starting to see now with the IWM expanding, as the Nasdaq is kind of like stalling a little bit, right? So as that happens, confidence comes in. As confidence comes in, more liquidity comes in. As more liquidity comes in, confidence grows. And so, a signal that you're going to see is the PMI, which is currently sitting at recession levels, start jumping into the 50s range, somewhere like low 50s as the next print. As soon as you see that spike up, confidence is coming. As that confidence comes in, liquidity risk on appetite comes in. And as that happens, Bitcoin's going to sniff that out and I think peak out in Q1. Right, so that's kind of what I think is going to happen here, and then we'll see. So I'll be hedging based on what I think. If what I think happens, I'll be hedging positions sometime in Q1, and then waiting Q2, Q3, just take the summer off, and kind of we'll see what happens, and then Q4 it'd be time to close some of those hedges and then get back into the market. That's what I kind of think is going to happen next year. But looking at all the stuff, you're absolutely right if you're shitting yourself right now, but you got to remember you're supposed to be smarter than retail dumb money, and you shouldn't be looking at minute-to-minute charts, right? Because that's going to give you a little bit of a headache, and you're a bit of a moron if you're looking at minute-to-minute charts, especially if you have a long-term vision. If you are a trader and you're looking to trade Bitcoin, I don't know what the fuck you're doing watching my videos, because basically I don't do any of that. I buy and hold forever, right? Like I said, I have very, very strong opinions, and they're violently held, because ultimately there's always only 3 rules to Bitcoin. Step number 1, you buy Bitcoin. Step number 2, shut the fuck up. And step number 3, you get fabulously wealthy.